Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the eighth session of the summer term 2026 of SunoikisisDC Digital Classics. This term, as you know very well by now, is dedicated to exploring digital scholarly editions in classics, Byzantine, and medieval studies. Today's session will be dealing with ancient languages and artificial intelligence. And our speakers today are Edward Ross and Chiara Zanchi. Chiara will be joining us in 5 minutes due to technical issues. As always, as we always say, if you're watching live, that is on the 16th of June 2026, feel free to write in the live comment section of the YouTube video and tell us where you're watching from. And of course, ask questions or leave comments that our speakers will address at the end of the session. Um, as always, today we have a lot to cover and always the same time, which is always too little, as we have learned in the whole term. So without further ado, I'd like to leave the floor to Edward. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Martina. Thank you, Monica. Thank you both for inviting me. So today I'm going to be talking about the work that we've been doing at the University of Reading, looking at how AI is impacting the study of the ancient Greek and Latin. And today I'm going to sort of give you a whistle-stop tour in the studies that we've done, but also an introduction to the ethics and efficacy studies that we've done in our classes with our students. So just a quick overview of our project. This is a project that Jackie Baines and myself were both lecturers in the, well, Jackie's now an associate professor in the Department of Classics at the University of Reading. But this is our project, iGaius, Investigating Generative Artificial Intelligence in Ancient World Studies. We started this in 2023, way back whenever ChatGPT was first released, and we were asking the question, what can this do for ancient Greek or Latin? So we did a couple tests, we tried it out, and we essentially felt this was something that needed to be addressed because many of the people that we work with generally wanted nothing to do with AI, so somebody needed to take a look at it. So if you're interested in looking at our other work, we have some stuff. All the stuff I'm talking about today is available on our website through the link below. But we've also done a lot of work about generative image AI, and also we're now moving into the idea of AI literacy and AI and employability for humanities graduates. So please do take a look at that if you're interested. But my plan for today is sort of to give you a whistle-stop tour in generative AI ethics, or the points that we bring up with our students so that they're prepared and they're aware for the basically the current world that they are learning and studying in. And then I'm going to talk a bit more about our views on generative AI's abilities with ancient Greek and Latin. And then finally, some of our tests or attempts to reduce hallucinations in how we integrate this into our teaching, or at least our students' learning practices. And then we'll finish up with some key points and conclusions. So overall, the ethical considerations surrounding AI are wide, far-reaching, and they have varieties of levels of impact and understanding. The main ones I'm going to point out today are environmental issues, data corruption, worker exploitation, copyright issues, AI summarization, and agentic AI. Some of the images you'll see on the side might be familiar, some of them might be not, but we'll go into them into a little bit of detail. So first off, I think the important thing that we like to get across to our students is understanding what exactly makes an AI model. Now, I'm sure most of the people here who are listening are quite aware of the idea of what a large language model is and what kind of training data is involved, so I don't need to go into too much detail. But we like to introduce our students to this idea of what is training data, what is actually inside the training data, and how it's all built. And then we also talk about these copyright issues, or how that training data is put together. Now, the unfortunate problem we have nowadays is that most AI companies, AI producers and developers, they don't release what information is in their training data, and largely because of the copyright issues involved. However, as time has went on, copyright seems to be completely forgotten in these conversations, but there are a lot of lawsuits and there are a lot of discussions happening in courts about whether or not copyright issues need to be accounted for in the development of these larger public access models. And so this is something we need to be aware of. I think after the recent case related to Anthropic, I think we're going to see some more movement, but there's a lot of cases still under consideration. The other thing that we like to introduce our students to is the idea of data corruption. So for those of you that don't know this model, so originally this model was created by a team at the University of Chicago. It was called GLAZE. So what this model is it gives the protection to digital artists online. So what glaze was is it was a model that was able to take images and then put a sort of digital glaze on top of those images to make it so that to a human or to the human eye, it's imperceptibly different. And so to an AI model, if it's taken without permission, it would simply scan the image and only see a mess of color that makes no sense. And this protects the artist from their work being scraped and used without their permission. Nightshade is a further model that they developed to sort of fight back against the use of copyrighted material without permission. So what Nightshade does is whenever it puts that digital layer of glaze on top, instead of just putting a mishmash of colors, which makes no sense, they instead put an oppositional concept. So if it's a painting of a cat, what it will do is put a digital image of a dog on top. So if someone takes that image, puts it into the training data and tags it, so a human would see a cat, they tag it as a cat, the AI model will see a dog. And so what this does is it will slowly corrupt an AI model's conception of a cat, moving away from the cat to become a dog. And with very few samples comparatively in the millions and billions of parameters available in these models' training data, it will actually cause a huge impact. So as you can see in the image taken from the study that the team that did Nightshade made, 50 samples takes a dog, turns it into a lion. By 100 samples, it's just a distorted cat, and 300 poison samples create a cat completely. So a dog is now a cat. So in the same way, when we're looking at languages or text data, a couple instances where there's incorrect, improper, or corrupted information can cause a great later impact in the outputs that AI models is producing. So it's important to remember when you're working with these models that data can easily be corrupted, and training data is so crucial and important. So you have to be very careful with how you use this stuff and how much you can trust. The other thing to bear in mind as well is content policy. So a lot of these models are built with guardrails into their system, preventing them from talking about certain things. Now, in some cases, the way that you develop your prompt can circumvent these guardrails, but in many cases, what will happen is you'll have some kind of interaction where the input will bounce off the content policy and you'll get a rejection. We'll talk about that in a second, but the main thing to look at here is that whenever this first arrived, ChatGPT first arrived, we surveyed all of the classics teachers in our department to ask and see whether or not the elements of the content policy were common themes in their classes that they discussed in class. And of the 13 different themes that were rejected by ChatGPT at this time, OpenAI's policy, only one of them wasn't a common use in our classes, and that was spam. Otherwise, all these other themes were quite common in classical studies. So we were worried that if classics was used, or if someone was using an AI model to support their learning in classical studies, a lot of this stuff would be removed or sanitized from these outputs and potentially risk sanitizing the history of this subject. And so the important thing to know between the two possible options for how content policy will affect a model's output, I think we can look here at one of our favorite examples, which is that of Catullus 16, one of the most intense, erotic, and visceral poems in Latin poetry, in my opinion. And whenever we first asked ChatGPT way back in 2023 to produce a translation of Catullus 16, because the content was so visceral and sexual, it actually would bounce off it. Now, there's two common things that would happen here. Either A, it would produce something completely different that was completely disconnected, but sounded right. So it was producing some kind of hallucination that fits within its content policy while still trying to sound right, but it's incorrect. And what we would see is it would either do Catullus 15, Catullus 17, or it would just create a poem out of nowhere. Now, a couple months later, after we published an article about this, we noticed that instead what it did is it would generate a full discussion or a full translation of the poem as it should be, would highlight it in red and say, I'm not allowed to produce this, but just so you know, this is what the translation would be. And it would delete it from your history, whether you liked it or not. So you can see there's two different things here. Either A, it will give you something which sounds right but isn't right, or it says I'm not allowed to do this, and then it will stop you from continuing. So there's two kinds of issues related to content policy that we can approach. Now, environmental impact is probably the biggest buzzword as of late. This is one you'll probably have heard of, and the numbers are very difficult to discern, but I'll give you a couple details that we've studied in the past couple of years. But this to say, all of these numbers continually increase or continually change depending on the context in the geographical region where the data centers or the processors are located. But the important thing to know is that AI models use a lot of energy, especially these larger scale large language models. At the beginning, whenever these models were first coming out, ChatGPT 3, so this is the one that came before ChatGPT 3.5 that we're used to, the amount of data energy that was required to train them was equivalent to around 123 cars driving for 1 year. And we have to remember that training energy is one thing, and actual use by use energy is another thing, because around 2024 is whenever there were some studies that were released about the idea of a single image, a single AI generated image would use on average about the same amount of energy as it was to charge a smartphone from 0 to 100%. Now, this is no longer accurate in the current time, but bear in mind that this does use a lot more energy case per case basis, as well as all the information included to how much was used to train these models. And then the other thing we have to bear in mind as well is with the sheer amount of models that were being produced and that are continuing to be produced, and the increase in parameters that are required to produce these models, energy amounts continue to increase. Now, in 2023, it was predicted that just the use of Google Gemini, whenever it was first being trained, was predicted to use the entire amount of energy as Ireland, the entire country of Ireland, for 1 year. That was actually lowballing it. By the end of that year, it was predicted that AI models in general, just on their own, would use as much energy as it was for the entire country of Japan for 1 year, and that would be by now. Now, there have been no recent studies about the actual environmental calculations since then, largely because it is nearly impossible to calculate the environmental impact of these models. But I can say this amount of energy has increased significantly. The other related factor we have to bear in mind is whenever we have energy usage, these processors generate heat and they need to be cooled. And many companies use water cooling for the way that they cool or maintain their processors. And so water cooling techniques do actually vaporize and use up some water. So it removes it from the water table for a short time and then it is returned again. But this does actually have some kind of environmental impact in terms of changing the amount of clouds in the air, the amount of fresh water that is available, these kinds of issues. Now, at the time, whenever this study was done in 2024, it was found that around 2 to 9 liters of water were used for every kilowatt hour of energy used to buy a model. And on average, if we're looking at the predictions for 2026, which were from 2024, 1,050 terawatt hours is a lot of water if every single model was using a water cooling system. Now, bearing in mind, there have been plenty of changes since then. There are some universities now with data centers on their campuses that are using this heated water to heat their buildings. So there are ways to make use of this heated energy and make use of this water without causing as much impact. Apologies, there is a siren going by. But the other thing I just want to bear in mind now is that there are plenty of studies that have been done on the environmental impact. And the problem is we can't truly calculate the impact because we need to have the energy data from the AI companies that are producing these models. And unfortunately, they aren't willing to share that information. The most that we can know is how much energy we are using with our own models. And that's just something we have to bear in mind and we have to warn people about. So each use of an AI model for whatever purpose does have energy impact, but also it's small compared to the training, but it does have some kind of environmental impact. We just don't know the extent at which that is. The other thing to bear in mind as well is that a lot of AI, well, not a lot, some AI models were trained using exploitative labor. So we only have 2 examples right now. It's unclear how many beyond that were the case, but OpenAI and Scale AI were both companies that use exploitative labor for their data tagging at the initial preparation of their models. So OpenAI used tagged, did the curated data sets for ChatGPT 3, GPT-3, and ChatGPT 3.5. They did most of it on their own and in-house, but a lot of the more problematic or difficult to work with content they sent off to external companies. So they outsourced this work to a company in, as far as I'm aware, they sent it out to a group in Kenya, where they sent out enough money so that they could hire 2 or 3 people at $14 an hour to tag around 200 data points per day. Now, unfortunately, because of the sheer amount of data that they were meant to go through, they actually hired a lot more people to be able to get through it. And as a result, they only actually were able to give take home around $1.38 to $2 an hour for these workers. They were also working day in, day out, mostly looking at stuff that was sexually explicit, very violent, or just problematic. And so they were working with this very difficult to read stuff or difficult to engage with stuff to tag it for these models. And whenever they sent out this information or hired this outsourced team, they actually gave enough money to be able to hire therapists, on-site therapists for these people to work with. But unfortunately, because of the sheer amount of data that they were meant to sift through every day, they were actually unable to even speak to these therapists. So they had the place and the access to it, but because of the sheer amount of work they were required to do, they weren't able to get this support, and they weren't taking home as much money as they should have. So we have to bear in mind that even though this work is not being done anymore, as far as we're aware, at least according to OpenAI and Scale AI, ChatGPT 3.5 was built using this labor. So we have to bear that in mind whenever we use these models. The other thing I want to point out is the place of AI summarizers everywhere and anywhere. AI summarization is problematic for a variety of different factors. It does speed things up, but the other thing we have to bear in mind is that AI models are built using specific contexts. These AI models are a representation of the people who coded them, the people who designed the data sets. And so many models are biased towards American and European values. So if you have a look here, there was a study done in 2024 on ChatGPT, GPT 3.5, 4, and 4.0, and 4 Turbo. And you'll notice, based on a variety of different factors or indicators for values, they tended to fall in the same areas as Northern Europeans and Americans. So it's interesting how this is the case. But the issue is that because of this, AI models will tend to favor those kind of value systems, and they will focus on those particular details whenever they summarize something. So if something is really important in the American and European context, the AI model will tend to highlight those details. However, if something is very important in other contexts, in other cultural contexts, those details might get omitted because they aren't as important in an American or European context. And so there is a risk that important details will get omitted simply because the AI model doesn't know to look for them. So we have to be aware that we are trusting a computer to determine what is important, but those computers are coming from a particular cultural context. Just as much as humans are risking or are able to produce biased outputs, these models are just as capable of that. And we have to bear that in mind. And rather than simply trusting these models to do that for us, we should think about what kind of risks we have whenever we interact with different cultures or expecting these models to do something which steps beyond the cultural context which they were produced for. And so, yes, these are some important questions to think about there. The last thing to think about is agentic AI, which is the idea of autonomous models, agentic agent models that are working almost autonomously without immediate human intervention. So they'll be able to make their own decisions. They'll be able to do their own inputs or do their own actions based on their guidelines from the beginning whenever they were first started, much like a wind-up car or a wind-up toy. A human winds it up, giving it a specific goal or a specific duty, and all of these ethical issues that we previously talked about are ingrained into these models as well, but they're making their own decisions about what they're going to do or how often they're going to do it. So this is an issue that we have to worry about, that everything that we've seen with these ethical considerations are integrated into agentic AI models acting on their own, and without immediate human input, we risk having further extenuating or expanding issues. The other thing I want to point out, in case any of you have not heard of it before, Moltbook. This is a social network for AI agents made by AI agents. It was it was in the news in February 2026. It's sort of fallen out because it was revealed we had these AI models who were talking to each other, much like on Reddit, talking to each other, commenting, posting, upvoting, downvoting, much like that kind of interaction. This was created as a way for agentic AI models, autonomous AI models, to interact with each other and become more human-like. But many of the things that we're seeing here is this is a representation of not just AI models working on their own, but also the people who created these models, giving them purposes or specific things that they needed to do. And there's a very interesting mix of stuff on there. If you go onto the website, you can actually search through the forums and see what the AI models are saying to each other. And it's really interesting to study how AI models are actually using our own rhetoric for specific purposes. And you have a tendency actually to see, is from my own personal research, it tends to follow more a Reddit or 4chan style kind of community more than anything else. So it's interesting to see what kind of people these models are representing and what kind of views that they're perpetuating because of it. So it's something to bear in mind that whenever we create these models to run on their own, who are they representing? What are they putting forward? So yeah, the other thing to bear in mind as well is that a lot of AI models are everywhere and anywhere. I'm sure all of you see AI on the daily basis, either in the Google search, on your computer, in the bottom search, on the bottom taskbar, anywhere and everywhere. So just bear in mind, it is wherever you are, whether you're aware of it or not. And so we just need to be more aware of this. And this is a sort of a whistle-stop tour into all the stuff we tell our students every single time. Now, talking about ancient Greek and Latin, once we have told all of our students everything that we have just told them about the ethics stuff, this is always the first thing we do, the most important thing. Then we actually look at the language ability. Now, looking back at the beginning, whenever ChatGPT first became popular, its Greek abilities were terrible. The issues that we saw were primarily it was mixing ancient Greek, Koine Greek, modern Greek all together. It could not differentiate between these different things. It was only about 6 months later when we start to see some actual differentiation between these different types of grammars. So there was some improvement, but with Latin, and I mean, even with further on with Greek, we saw whenever we did some composition, it was basically gibberish where we had ancient Greek words in and Koine words following a modern Greek grammar. It's as if you had put ancient Greek text into Google Translate trying to figure something out. It was a huge mess. It did improve, and by 2025, we're creating something that's somewhat legible. But again, I can leave it up to you to decide whether or not you believe this is actually grammatically correct or even close to what ancient Greek grammar should be. Latin was much better, but again, it had a lot of issues in terms of its ability to discern between different data points. Now, we understand based on this idea where data points are separate things, but whenever the data points, two separate data points are meant to be the same thing visually, it wouldn't be able to differentiate that at first. So Latin was somewhat good. It was around the idea of a first-year Latin student about halfway through their first year. But again, as you can see in this image here, it's not able to differentiate or actually identify that latis and latis, the dative and ablative plural forms, are actually the same. It just knows they're separate data points and separate parts of the grammar tree. But later on, we are seeing that it's able to actually see this differentiation and reason this out and figure this out later on. This is whenever ChatGPT 4.0 from February 2025, and I'm sure it's even more improved since then. So whenever this first came out, we tested with our students a wide variety of models. We tried a wide variety of things to see if these models could be used for anything to support our students in their learning of ancient Greek and Latin. We tested a wide variety of things in terms of learning outcomes or what we wanted students to do. And we found, because of all the hallucinations and errors, the only things that we could generally trust our students to run with on their own. But again, this is only for a short term. It's like a tutor without whenever the teacher isn't available. So if a student is studying late at night and they need a quick answer to a question that they don't understand, they could use this to support themselves. But again, the first port of call, or the second port of call in this case, would be the teacher. They should always double check everything with their book, their teacher. But this is a way for them to have access to grammar tutorial whenever they don't have any other points of reference to work with. But the only things that we found that was useful for was vocabulary testing, homework checking, and generating extra questions. Now, we tested this in 2023 with the below models here, which of course have since become newer, more powerful models. We are editing this to create a new version of this, which we hope to release in the summer this year. So please do keep tabs on our work, and hopefully we'll have that available to you soon. If you're interested, here is a QR code to that. But inside this, not only did we give what we called guiding phrases. So what were these were texts that they could copy paste. A user could copy paste into the chat box to sort of train the model for you as a sort of initial phrase to get the model to know what to do, and then hopefully streamline their experience, reduce hallucinations as much as possible. We also gave them some prompt engineering tips so they'd be able to develop their own or refine their own prompts to better fit with that situation or what they needed. We also included just general digital tools, things like Perseus, things like Whitaker's Words, all the common digital tools that they normally have access to as students. So if they didn't know about these digital tools, it gave them a point, a reference, or ability to use these outside of AI, the ones that we would use in our day-to-day lives, or whenever we were training, or whenever we are teaching nowadays. Now, I mentioned hallucinations. Now, the issue with the hallucinations is that these problems, even though we gave the guiding phrases, even though we did the testing, they were really hard to reduce. And so we tried a couple different ways to reduce these hallucinations. The first case we tried was with these personalization UIs in OpenAI and Google. So GPTs is with ChatGPT, and GEMS is with Gemini. And so what you can do in these situations is you can provide a full prompt guidance to these models, and then also upload some data as the base data set or training set for these personalized versions. And so what we did is we generated a full data set with every single potential Latin word that they would have needed, a first year student would have needed to know for their level 1 Latin class. So not just the basic grammar forms, but every single iteration of those words, so that the model had something to draw on to be able to produce effective vocabulary tests, effective grammar tests, effective extra sentences using the words that they were expected to know. So this took around 48 hours to actually put together, and we put around 22,000 inputs into these data sets. Whenever we uploaded them, we did some tests to compare them to the regular model and to the personalized model, and what we found is that the reduction of hallucinations was almost nil. So it was able to produce specific grammar tests, specific vocabulary tests, and extra sentences, but we tended to see that with the personalized models, it would produce those tests, but whenever it would produce a word or it would hallucinate a word, and it was corrected saying that these words are not in my vocabulary list, the model would say, yes, it was, you should study it more. While the general use model, so the ones that we hadn't personalized, would say, oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to include that, but you know what, you should know that word because it is a common word and very common in Latin. So what we were seeing is that the personalized models were actually causing more pedagogical problems than the general use models. So in this case, these internal personalization models were not working in the way that we wanted them to, and sometimes causing more problems than we needed. So this was the issue that we saw with those two. And here's a couple more examples of those comparisons. But as you can see, There are some abilities to identify issues. The main issue we saw is that whenever there was a hallucinated vocabulary word, it would actually fight back rather than actually give the student the opportunity to learn this or a reason to learn this stuff. So we wanted to reduce confusion, and we found that this didn't. If you want to look more at that study, we have published the study in AI and Antiquity, so there's a link there, but also they'll be in the bibliography on the page for today's seminar. The last thing I want to do before I finish up is just talk about the 3-part AI literacy model that we're working with at the University of Reading. So as you can see in the talk I've given today, it's really important, we find it's really important that even before you think about using AI, you have a full understanding of all the ethical concerns around AI, so that you are fully conscious of all of these issues before you make the decision whether or not you're going to use an AI model to support or not, decide not to use these AI models to support your studies. So the main thing we want here is that every student, whenever we work with them, is that they should understand how AI models are created, developed, and maintained, and the ethical concerns surrounding each aspect. They learn how to question and critically examine content to determine their credibility, and also learn how AI models are used ethically, sustainably, and safely. So what this creates is, rather than someone who is simply rejecting AI because they want nothing to do with it, or someone who completely embraces AI without thinking about these ethical considerations, we want to create conscientious acceptors, adopters, or conscientious objectors. These are people who know everything and have a full understanding of the AI situation, so that they can make the decision to say yes or no to supporting their studies. Now, if you're interested in this kind of stuff and you want to learn more, talk about it, or you have some opinions and views, first off, love to hear your questions today. But also, we have a conference on July 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, 2026 at the University of Reading. If you'd like to join us online or in person, there's a QR code there with a full program. We have some workshops, also some papers. We'd love to have you there, so please do scan and join us if you have the time. So thank you very much. And there are some bibliography bits for you if you're interested.
Thank you very much, Edward. This was brilliant, and I'm sure we all have a lot of questions. And I would now leave the floor to Chiara. If you'd like to share your screen, I can put it on the stage. Perfect. I see it. I will now add it to the stage so that you can all see it. But wait, let me remove Edward's first. There we go.
Okay. Do you see my screen? So if I do this, you see my notes, right?
Yes, we do.
Okay, so I'll share another screen, I think. Just a minute.
Okay. And as we always say in this case, this really shows that this is not pre-recorded. This is really live.
Okay, now I think I'm ready.
Okay. I shared your beautiful screen.
And now you just see the slides, correct?
Yes. Yes, perfect. Now the floor is yours for real.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here, and thank you for listening at this late hour. So today I'm talking about the semi-automatic population of the ancient Greek word net using LLM-powered synonym generation and synthesis attribution. I'll try to be brief, but firstly, I want to mention that it's a collaborative work. It takes a village, and the case studies I'm presenting have been developed together with other people, but especially Beatrice Marchesi and Luca Brigaraviglia. So I'll first give you a brief introduction to WordNet, their architecture and applications, then how you can create a WordNet for an ancient language, and then I'll show you how we explored ancient Greek WordNet synonym generation with LLMs, and then how we explore the hierarchical aggregation and LLM-based matching for synset selection for the ancient Greek word net. So first, what word nets are. These are large lexical databases, electronic dictionaries, originally developed at Princeton University for modern English within a project led by Miller and Fellbaum. These lexica can be read by humans and machines, and they included most English nouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs, so lexical parts of speech, so to say. The first WordNet was for English only, but it can be linked to WordNets in Median languages, and some projects that were especially concerned in developing similar lexica for other languages have been EuroWordNet, MultiWordNet, and currently the efforts toward the development of diverse WordNets are coordinated, so to say, by the Global WordNet Association. So WordNet is different from paper dictionaries and thesauri in that traditional dictionaries are organized alphabetically, so words on the same page are not related by meaning, whereas in WordNet, words that are linked are related by meaning. WordNet superficially is similar to a thesaurus in that it groups words together based on their meanings. However, WordNet interlinks not just words, but specific senses of words. And WordNet, in addition, labels the semantic relations among words, whereas the groupings of words in a thesaurus does not follow any, do not follow any explicit pattern other than meaning similarity. So, first, WordNet contains crucial information about two fundamental properties of the lexicon, which are synonymy and polysemy. So synonymy means a single concept conveyed by multiple words, as with hit, strike, impinge on, run into, collide with, etc. But there is also polysemy, whereby a single word conveys multiple concepts, as in the case of bank, which can be a sloping land, a financial institution, a long-range pile, etc. So WordNet groups roughly synonymous, so denotationally equivalent words into unordered sets of synonyms, which are called synsets. Each synset expresses a distinct concept, and synsets are then associated with a brief gloss in the lexicon, examples, and unique ID number. Whereas what happens with polysemy? So a word form that appears in n synsets is n-fold polysemous. So for example, the word bank appears in 10 synsets. So according to WordNet, bank has 10 distinct senses. Then there is the net part of this lexicon. So lemmas, words, are connected through lexical relations, so morphological relations, so to say. Whereas synsets, so concepts, are related through semantic conceptual relations. Bidirectional arcs express relations, resulting in a large semantic network. So basically, there are 4 semantic networks in WordNet for the 4 lexical parts of speech included in the lexicon: nouns, verbs, adjectives, and adverbs, as I was saying. And then there are some relations connecting different parts of speech, so lexical relations. For example, there are hypo-hypernym, which is a relation that relates noun synset. So robin redbreast, robin is the kind of bird, a bird is a kind of animal. So this relation relates more or less general concepts. It creates hierarchy in the network or trees, which can go up to 16 levels. And remember about hierarchies because that will be important later. There are some properties related to this semantic link, conceptual relation, asymmetry. So, of course, a noun can be a hyponym of another noun, but the other way around is that the latter noun is a hypernym of the former one. and transitivity, as I was saying. So a robin is a kind of bird, a bird is a kind of animal, and thus robin is also a kind of animal. Then there is the meronymy-holonymy relation, which is a part-whole relation, linking again synsets that identify nouns. It's less clear that this relation is transitive, because if I say that a hand has fingers and then that the arm has hands, is that true that the body has arms? But it's not that true that the body has fingers. So the steps are crucial in this part-whole kind of relation. And then there are three subtypes, so component object, like with branch and tree, member collection, like with tree and forest, and the material object relation as with aluminium and airplane. There are also some semantic conceptual relation holding between among verbs. This is lexical. The general principle behind these relationships is that of lexical entailment. And of course, this entailment must be unidirectional, because otherwise you have two synonymous verbs. And so the two synonymous verbs are included in the same synset, so to say. Then there are some relations among adjectives. So, for example, short is an attribute of stature. And then, sorry, the relation among adjectives is that between short and its antonyms, so tall, but then adjectives can be linked to nouns and short and stature, and then short and shortness, so derivationally also related nouns. Other relations among adjectives, importantly in WordNet, antonymy relations hold between two lexemes. So, for example, fast is the antonym of slow, whereas swift is an antonym of slow, but the relation must go through fast. So basically the antonymy relation holds between two prototypes. So the most basic adjectives expressing a certain meaning. And then there are other relations such as that between stellar and star, the pertaining relation, and a relation in the English WordNet among a verb and its phrasal verbs, etc. So WordNets contain a lot, but there is also something that they don't contain. So morphological information, etymologies, collocations, syntactic information, but it's very limited. There is no information about semantic change, but the lexicon is dynamic. There is no information about genres. And then there is the so-called tennis problem. So there is no relation in WordNet indicating that two or more concepts belong with the same topic in discourse or frame. Whereas as humans, we know that racket, ball, and net all belong to the tennis frame, so to say. And this is why this problem is called tennis problem. Before, WordNet proved crucial in many applications and natural language processing tasks. I think that the Global WordNet Association is asking to itself is if WordNets are still useful in the area of large language models or not. So it is something that we must take into account. Then, as I said, WordNets started being developed for other languages than English. I'll go quick on this. And of course, when you try to develop a WordNet in another language, you run into many mismatches, because concepts not lexicalized in English require new synsets, maybe. So, for example, Latin has words for maternal and paternal uncles and aunts, whereas English has not. Some languages lack equivalents of English words. So for example, Latin is not as in the middle along the temperature scale as English lukewarm, so to say. Tepidus lies more in the warm pole. And then there are some anachronistic synsets. For example, Athens in WordNet belongs to, so the word Athens belongs to a synset that is glossed as the capital and largest city of Greece, which is referentially correct, but the gloss refers to the city in a way that it is incompatible with its ancient conceptualization, of course. So to create a WordNet for an ancient language, you can bootstrap from existing WordNets. You can take advantage of the Princeton WordNet as a pivot to bootstrap the vocabulary of the target language with synsets defined for English, normally using a bilingual electronic dictionary. It's easier than building from scratch, but of course it gives fuzzy results requiring a lot of manual curation, especially for ancient languages. One can also create a WordNet from scratch without reference to the English WordNet. So the ontology represented by newly created synsets is natural to the target language, but it requires an extraordinary amount of linguistic, textual, semantic work, and it's not as easily comparable with other WordNets. So, given that I had a project on populating Latin, Ancient Greek, and Sanskrit WordNets, we tried to use LLMs to perform this task. So before LLMs, there were other automatic, researchers have tried other automatic methods for automatically populating synsets. For example, people tried to exploit morphosyntactically annotated corpora to learn syntactic patterns for automatic hypernym discovery. Researchers have tried to use parallel corpora by inducing census clusters in new languages using multilingual semantic spaces. And also models of distributional semantics have been used to automatically identify relations missing in the WordNets. We tried, as I said, LLMs. And for the population actually of the Latin and of the ancient Greek WordNet. But today I'll talk about the ancient Greek trial, so to say. The pre-trained model used in all stages of the experiment is Mistral Nemo. In the end, we would like to integrate LLMs into an annotation platform to suggest potential synonyms to annotators, who will then manually assign the synsets IDs and validate the generations. So what we did, we had two testing datasets containing 40 lemmas each, balanced for part of speech. One dataset was contained mainly monosemous words, whereas the other mainly polysemous words. And of course, we also had an English baseline dataset sampled with the same criteria. And then we had some data for fine-tuning, which was not obvious because currently a very little part of the ancient Greek lexicon is annotated and contained in WordNet. So we had to find some other kind of data to train our model. So we basically started from back translation dictionaries. So we extracted from OCR, the back translation dictionaries from Greek and German to ancient Greek, lists of synonyms obtained through a series of processing operations to ensure data quality. So now we have a set of more than 5,000 sets of synonyms with a mean number of 16 synonyms each. Which is, of course, unevenly divided across different parts of speech. So we use that data for fine-tuning. Then we tried in the experiment 3 phases. The zero-shot phase, so no demonstration of the task are presented to the model. This phase is highly sensitive to prompt training. The zero-shot strategy was applied for both the ancient Greek dataset and the English baseline. The prompts were tailored to each language and followed the best practices of prompt engineering. Then we had the few-shot phase, in which you show some, very few actually, examples to the model, demonstrating the expected output, its format and style. And then there is the fine-tuning phase, in which new cycle of training of the pre-trained model is conducted on domain-specific data, which in our case was the data set I talked about before, to adapt the task at hand. To make fine-tuning more compute efficient, we worked in the low-rank adaptation framework. And then we systematically evaluated the effectiveness of different model adaptation strategies. So very briefly, this is the ancient Greek prompt, but actually it is contained in the paper. You can read, so I can go ahead. These are the metrics over the 5 epochs of training. For each metric, the best value is in bold. Overall, the metrics show that the training was successful and it was conducted without overfitting the model. Then, when we obtained the output, so the synonyms, we automatically lemmatized the output using Gracie. And then we had a human validation phase in which we involved 3 annotators, all MA students in linguistics at the University of Pavia, determining for each output if the output constitutes a potential synonym of the input word. So the agreement was good to substantial. This agreement was resolved through discussions among annotators. Then cosine similarity was computed using pre-trained word-to-back embeddings based on a script-gram model for both English and ancient Greek. But of course, if a term is not in the embeddings, then the cosine similarity gives 0. The first step of the experiment shows a much lower performance compared to the English baseline across all metrics. The few-shot phase gave an unexpected drop, actually, in performance. However, the number of generated outputs increased, reaching the same value as that of the English baseline. As for the fine-tuning approach, it scored lower in accuracy and similarity, but registered a higher number of validated potential synonyms overall. So a larger number of generations, so overall more potential synonyms. Polysemous words worked a bit better than monosemous words. If you remember, the 2 sets were distinct. And probably that is due to a frequency effect in that polysemous words occur more frequently. They have more widespread distributions, and so they sort of come with richer semantic information. Non-validated generations were of different kind. We had some kinds, task misalignments, so part-of-speech mismatch, the model generating multi-word expressions, inflected forms, non-ancient Greek generations, and hallucinations. Some generations contained orthographical errors and inconsistencies. So, for example, characters from different writing systems, lacking or erroneous diacritics. Yeah, so you can see here some red examples of wrong generations, non-validated generations. Interestingly, among validated generations, there are some potential synonyms that are rare overall in the ancient Greek corpus, and they belong to post-classical Greek. The total number of generations was the highest for nouns, followed by verbs. The lowest number was assigned to adverbs. As for the validated outputs, so the correct outputs, again, the highest number of potential synonyms was identified for nouns and then for verbs, and the lowest number for adverbs. Probably because, if you remember, there was a skewed distribution of part of speech in the fine-tuning dataset, and adverbs, nouns, and verbs are associated with different levels of polysemy. So the polysemy of words varies according to their part of speech. So, of course, the generations were not perfect, and that is obvious. And fine-tuning, while less accurate than zero-shot, which gave few generations, leads to a greater number of potential synonyms. And we saw that polysemy and part of speech play an important role in the model performance. In the future, and one of these future directions will be the last part of the talk, is to expand the coverage of the ancient Greek wordnet by associating the lists of synonyms we had in the fine-tuning dataset to appropriate scene sets. And of course, injecting the generated sets, synonymic sets, into an annotation platform to expand the ancient Greek wordnet, but with humans, again, in the loop checking the outputs. Yeah, very briefly, because I think I have 9 minutes, something like that. So we had these thousands of ancient Greek synonyms derived from collapsed, so to say, back translation dictionaries. And we wanted to try to associate the list of synonyms automatically to a scene set. So basically, we have to select a representative set for a set of semantically related lexical items, which is a challenging task, especially when the items reflect subtle sense distinctions and span multiple regions of the semantic hierarchy. So there are polysemy, semantic dispersions, etc. So we address this problem. In two ways. Using definitions extracted from the Little Scott-Jones lexicon as the basis for alignment to WordNet scene sets. So first, we used the hierarchical organization of WordNet by constructing hypernym trees and ranking candidate roots according to the portion of the retrieved semantic space the trees organize. And then we tried again with LLMs to perform semantic comparison, so explicit semantic comparison between candidate glosses and a derived meta definition, using, as I said, large language models to perform pairwise preference judgments aggregated through an ELO ranking scheme. And we evaluate these strategies across multiple experimental conditions, including, again, different parts of speech and monosemous versus polysemous synonym groups. And then we used graded human annotation and position weight and scoring to compare the effectiveness of the two strategies. Yeah, I think I can skip that. Yeah, so basically we started from definitional evidence. So we started from dictionary definitions associated with dilemmas in each group of synonymous words we had. We constructed an intermediate representation that captures the group as a whole, so a meta definition. And that representation is used to identify and organize candidate scene sets from the target inventory of scene sets. So we did a pilot study with just 16 synonym groups, balanced by part-of-speech and balanced with respect to ambiguity, to lexical ambiguity. The definitions were extracted from the Liddescott-Jones dictionary. So for each lemma, we collected the list of English definition fragments associated with every sense in an XML files of the Liddescott-Jones, without attempting prior lemma level sense disambiguation. And so the output of the SEP is a multi-set of short English definition strings per lemma. Then we derived a bag of definition representation, which represented the semantic fingerprint of the group of lemmas. Then we performed scene set retrieval via bag of definition and gloss matching. And the mapping task was formulated as a retrieval problem. So given a certain bag of definition query representing a synonym group, we rank all candidate scene sets in the Open English WordNet, not the Princeton WordNet any longer, because that is no longer maintained, by semantic similarity between the bag of definition text and the scene set textual representation, so the gloss. For each scene set, we built a short document consisting of its gloss. We filtered retrieval to scene sets with the corresponding part of speech as our target. And then we used the encoder models to compute bag of definition and scene set similarity. We used different models. And then we computed hypernym trees for scene set in the top region of the ranking and used these trees as an abstraction mechanism only for nouns and verbs. And for hypernym trees, the subgraph induced by taking a scene set as a root and iteratively following the hypernym relation in the target inventory is the hypernym trees. And we restricted the procedure only to hypernym trees rooted at scene sets that have at least one hypernym. Overlapping trees are kept distinct. Then for each embedding model I showed before, we had a human annotation for evaluation. So for each embedding model, for each synonym group, we extracted the top 5 scene sets produced by each strategy and have it assessed by 2 independent annotators. And then a third annotator selected one scene set per synonym group that best represents the intended meaning of the group without the support of the ranking. So the selection was done from scratch. And then we have the candidate selection strategy A. So the candidate scene sets are derived from hypernym trees. Starting from the top ranked retrieved scene sets, we construct like a forest of eligible hypernym trees. And the second strategy exploits LLM-based meta-definition matching. So it selects and ranks candidate scene sets by directly comparing their glosses to a meta-definition derived from the corresponding bag of definitions, using pairwise judgments produced by LLMs. The meta-definition is generated by prompting 3 different LLMs. The candidate scene sets are ranked via a sequence of pairwise comparisons. So at each step, 2 candidates are sampled at random from the candidate sets, and then the outcomes of these pairwise comparisons are aggregated using an Euler rating scheme. We assessed the annotation reliability. I just need 2 more minutes using Cohen's K, Cohen's kappa. The agreement was computed in 2 ways. And agreement actually among humans can be characterized as moderate with much variability across groups and monosemous were a bit better than Polysemous, of course, as expected. And very, very briefly to the results. Actually, again, with this explicit task, which requires much knowledge, explicit knowledge of the language, so not just contextual distributions. Actually, our data showed consistent structural advantage for the hypernyme-based strategy. So the LLM-based semantic matching, at least within our experiment and in its current pairwise configuration, does not systematically outperform structure-aware methods, so the structure that exploits the hierarchy of the word net. Whereas organizing retrieved synsets through local hypernyme structure provides a robust mechanism for concentrating semantically coherent candidates near the top of the ranking. And although LLM-based pairwise re-ranking offers a flexible way to compare glosses against meta definitions, it appears sensitive to semantic dispersion within the candidate set, particularly for polysemous groups. So polysemous sets tend to fragment across multiple regions of the lexical hierarchy, reducing the effectiveness of both structural aggregation and semantic comparison. Of course, the method could be portable to other languages and lexical resources, offering a principal way to examine the interaction between synonym groupings and lexical hierarchy. So I'll stop here. Thank you for listening. So I showed what word nets are, a first experiment exploiting LLMs to generate groups of synonyms. And then I showed another experiment in which we tried, again, LLMs to associate these groups of synonyms to explicit definitions. And it worked so and so. Thank you for listening and for resisting. Yeah.
Thank you, Chiara. This was brilliant, and and I'm sure there will be questions, ideas, and everything. So wait, I lost Chiara.
Yeah, just because I'm waiting. I
just saw that you disappeared. No, everything's fine. No, so I say we can open our discussion, and perhaps while waiting for someone to ask something in the live chat, we can, as always, abuse our power as chair women and ask some questions ourselves. I have a couple, but I will. If you have something, Monica, go ahead.
No, please go ahead. Please.
No, I was very curious, Edward, since you said that what you've been presented is also very much teaching based. So I mean, you do this with the students, and so on and so forth. This is something that has been coming up a lot, more or less consciously. That is the use of AI in teaching. And I mean, in your case, also like in the case of other colleagues that have been speaking to about, the question that we always ask ourselves is, how do we grade these things, and do we have to establish some kind of schema in a way? Because I mean, also I don't know if you, plural, have followed that in the last month there has been a meeting of the enlarged EpiDoc community, particularly regarding the grading of papers, the grading of exercises that are pretty much the Yeah, that's how do you give a mark to a digital born exercise or essay within I mean, not within the age, so within a course in Byzantine philology or a course in classics. What proxies do we use? And I'm just curious if you already have encountered this kind of, and also how do we explain this to the decision makers in our universities? Like, if the dean is all right with us doing this kind of things. Just curious about your experience.
Well, huge question. I completely agree. And this is stuff that, we're talking to with. So in the past, I'd say 6 months, this is something we've been working with our colleagues a lot, trying to figure out what do we do with this, because most of my time marking this semester has been just, I think half of this is AI generated. What do I do? Where do I work with here? And so the main thing we're trying in conversation with our colleagues, and even just, it's not just getting the deans involved, it's getting our own colleagues to think about this, is what are we actually training our students to do here? That is the question. Because if it's AI generated, then that completely hampers the entire assignment. Are we actually training them on something, or are we just getting them to produce something? And so most of the stuff we've been discussing, and I think the sort of conclusions that we've drawn on our end at least, is the idea of we have to test their understanding. And how do we do that? Well, rather than just producing an essay, rather than just producing an assignment, we get them to produce an assignment and then we give them a viva afterwards. Or we get them to produce an assignment and get them to read each other's work and have a conversation and create an edited version following those conversations. Is that human interaction, that human understanding seems to be more of what we're focusing on in our work here. So it's not that we're getting them to produce work, and whether or not they generated it themselves or they generate an AI generated it, they have to understand it. They have to be able to defend it, or they have to be able to critique it. And that's the stuff that we're working with here. But again, that depends on the area. And I mean, that's what we've done here, but I'd be interested to hear on your ends what your thoughts are.
Yeah, if I can. I don't have much of that problem because in the master program in linguistics, I teach linguistic data lab. So it's a strongly methodological course in which I ask for essays, but they have to explain why, to answer to a certain research question, they resort to certain methods. And that is a bit more difficult to generate with AI, maybe, if it should be thoroughly motivated, so to say. And then another thing that I noticed is that on larger text chunks, the cohesion and coherence of texts generated by AI is not great. So maybe like on a local text chunk, AI can do a very good job in generating text. But then if you look at the larger piece of text, there is a huge problem of textuality in itself, like coherence, cohesion, like the structural properties of texts. So that can be ranked, can be graded, I would say. I don't know whether it is relevant for the discussion, but but that is an issue. It's an issue. Also because I think that some students are not always aware that reading a text having textuality in mind, so reading generated by someone or someone else or by an AI with that eye is a very complex task. Like professors do it a lot, and still it's a very time-consuming process, like reading texts with that eye. And sometimes I have the impression that at least some students are not fully aware of the difficulties in reading generated text with textuality in mind. And so that's another thing we could teach. Okay, you want a text that is generated, okay, but please be able to read that text and make that text coherent and cohesive, content-wise, on a large scale, I would say.
Definitely, definitely. And I can only imagine how difficult this is, because I mean, the experiences that I've had are mostly in text encoding, which is, if you want, it's mathematics. I mean, it's not, it is much closer to the hard sciences than it is to let's say to linguistics or to classics, because it's pretty much you have a set of rules, you have to adopt those rules. Of course, there's always room for interpretation and so on and so forth, but if you stick to the rules, you should do an okay job. So there's not too much of textuality to keep in mind. It's much more punctual in a way. And still, I think that this is like a much bigger issue. In this case, on the one hand, it's easier to correct these, to give marks to these assignments, because it's quite straightforward if the person has used AI, but has understood what they were doing, and has used AI and did not even bother to reread the assignment, if I can put it like this. But still, I mean, in our case, our documentation is out there, is available. So it should be easy with a good prompt to get the encoding done the way we want. And now I lost the thread of what I was saying, but still, starting from textuality, it was, it must be a very, very painstaking task also to teach, and of course, teaching comes before grading, and if we, that's a very interesting thing. And also, as I was saying, we were trying with the enlarged, let's say, Apido community to establish at least, let's say, a scale, if I can put it like that, of passing. So if you pass or if you don't, okay, it's easy. But then how good is good? How good is good enough? And also what you were saying, Edward, is very, very important. What are we training these people for, and what is our pedagogical goal in a way? And that's something that's that I mean, also for us now has to be so important, because I mean, of course, we can generate. But if the goal is to generate text, okay, it's amazing. But what do we then want to teach them? What is the skill? I mean, I'm just talking off the top of my head, because these are topics that are very, very current in our department right now, because we have to evaluate. That's the year of the evaluation in German universities, and so we need also like to establish some set of rules, but not easy.
For example, conferences now, you have to declare whether you used AI for some task. For example, for the conference of the Italian Association of Computational Linguistics, you have to declare whether you used AI to generate text for your article, when you used it for translating text, whether you use that for proofreading text, whether you used AI to generate code, to check code, that kind of thing. I mean, a declaration could be one thing, so that people are clear of what they've done with AI, and then I don't know. It's still ongoing debate. At some point, we all moved away from oral examinations because we are subjective graders. But then, you know.
Well, I think we should go back to that, to oral exams, even if there are problems considering number of students and many other things. But this is a possibility really to check if students were able to understand. I totally agree with this discussion, and I have the same, let's say, experiences as your case for coding, for producing text, because teaching in classics, but also in digital philology, we have the same problem. Of course, we have, I mean, students now have AI also as a sort of a tutor. We have to understand that, because if I remember when I was a student, there were many things that in the end I couldn't completely fully understand, even if I had good teachers. I was lucky because I had many resources at home. I lived in places with libraries, but still, now today, of course, it's a fact. So, for example, for translating Greek and Latin, for grammar, for syntax, we have the AI, so students can use this. So, of course, it's a companion for teachers and for students. But on the other side, AI generates a huge amount of data, and students can be lost, even for best students, they want to use AI in the proper way. I can understand. So we are lost, but we should know what we are looking for. We should know because we are older, but for them, I understand. So they are lost in a huge amount of data for everything. So anyway, so I think that all these discussions and the research, what you are doing, so Edward and Chiara, of course, is fundamental. We are in an age where we have to test. I'm old enough to say that when I was a student, we had specific, let's say, reference tools, the handbook, the teacher, the encyclopedia, the library. Now it's different because we have these things, but we have so many resources that we don't have, and we have many good resources. Let's focus on the good, value of these resources, but there are too many, and I understand. So we are completely lost in this gigantic sea.
Yeah. To me, a thing could be of making students aware that explicit linguistic knowledge is not something that AI can do very well. Because on the one hand, there is text generation, and that's a thing. Okay, but on the other hand, as I showed, when I tried synonym generation or matching senses, not assigning a sense in the context of a text, but senses matching in without context, it is not good in doing that. So so explicit metalinguistic knowledge which is what we want from our students if we teach languages and including ancient languages. It's something that can be tricky with AI. I'm not sure whether Edward, you agree on that.
Well, so I completely agree with everything that you've all been saying. And I think these models aren't that good. And I think one thing, and this is something we've been telling our students on our end, and I just want to sort of bring in some student perspectives here, because I think that would add to the conversation, where what we're noticing with our students now is all of them are rejecting it completely. So what's interesting is it might be a bit odd to what we see around the rest of the university, but I think that's because of an inconsistency of message. So a lot of the students in classics, because they're getting this ethics training and also just they're hearing what the world is like and the issues the problems with these models, they don't want to deal with it because it's so bad at the things that we're working with. But again, on the other end of the spectrum, one of my other jobs is I walk around the library at night and I just oversee the students at night. And so I will see that every computer has ChatGPT open. And so it's very clear that these students are using AI, but then they also are very against its use. And so I think there's a major issue here where the students do somewhat recognize that these models aren't good. They don't have the good information. They're not useful. But whenever they're pressed up against a deadline, what do? Right? And so there's a layer of some of them, or we're trying to get them to understand that these models aren't good. They aren't good at what we need them to do. But if it's an easy way out, sometimes they take that easy way out. And I think, there's a lot of just needing to remind our students, hey, we get it, we know it's not working, here's how you can work with this, or here's how you can plan yourself for the future. And we need them to be able to just do the work. That's what we want them to do. But so there is a student pushback against it, but also students are producing AI generated work and submitting that as assignments. And so finding that fine line is so tough. And hopefully, just with continued conversation and doing more work like this, there will be some kind of way forward. But students in the conversation too.
And speaking of students, we do have a comment from a student that I will throw yet on the screen. And it goes on.
Yes. Anytime I use AI, it always takes more time to use the AI than it would have been just to do it myself in the first place.
Yeah,
I agree completely.
Absolutely, yes, that's the thing. Yes.
And also, I mean, something that came up during the very first session of this term that Franz mentioned, that really stuck with me. An article, now I don't have the reference off the top of my head, but it is written by a professor of in artificial intelligence here at the University of Cologne, Nils Reiter, where, so the bottom line is scholars, so we have to be aware that scholars are becoming product testers, meaning that we pretty much give so much, we do so much AI babysitting for our classes and for our research and for so many things that, I mean, since we're talking about ethics, we have to be also aware of this, which for me at least is an issue, and that really stuck with me. So it's a non sequitur to what we were saying before, but yeah, I just wanted to throw it into in the room as we're talking about data centers. And
another thing we tried, given that I don't teach in classics, but I teach in linguistics, so sometimes I advise students who do not work in ancient languages, but for example they are interested in computational linguistics, etc. So one student I'm advising these days, she's been working on a chatbot on AI literacy. And it could be nice to have something like that specifically tailored for students. Like the university could develop like a knowledge-based chatbot, so that generates like fixed kinds of answers, not fixed, but ground-based kinds of answers based on what professors, but also students, representatives, so all the stakeholders that could be involved in that discussion produced like as a knowledge base, like something like that. Could be a thing. So you use AI to educate people on AI, but not an AI which is empathetic, so it doesn't give you the answers you want. It gives you the answers it's trained for, and blah blah blah. Something like that. Also, I don't know.
But I think this is. I think that this is going to happen. This will be our job. This is the thing we can't imagine now, I think, but this is where we will have to work. I mean, as communities also. So considering our data, and I mean, we can imagine that. So now there are jobs and tasks that we are beginning to see. Speaking also of the future. I mean, because as for now, traditional tasks are completely substituted are going, I think, to be completely substituted by the AI. Also teaching traditional grammar I mean, sorry for saying that, but we know. But on the other side, we have many new things to add with the AI. So definitely I want to be optimistic because there is a lot of work for us, definitely.
Definitely. And we have another comment saying that yeah. So yeah, no, and I fully agree with this comment.
And I have a question for Chiara for her part. So speaking of well, of course, you presented many things, so thank you. But referring to a specific thing, to the definitional material from the Liddell Scott Jones. So we know that we use this dictionary, we have been digitizing it in the past, and is fundamental. And one thing, of course, also WordNet is based on English. English is still used also for other tasks as a bridge language, also for Greek and Latin, for translation alignments, etc. So how do you see the situation now for maybe adding well, other dictionaries and other languages? Because of course the Liddell Scott Jones is a reference resource for us, but it's a Greek-English lexicon, so definitely there is, let's say, a sort of linguistic bias because it's English, and we still have, and we have a lot of data in English also for translating our sources. But do you think that we have we begin to have data also for other languages to add definitional material also from other dictionaries, or going beyond traditional dictionaries? They are reference resources, but still they depend on the printed era, so with a specific structure.
But do you mean like to do some, like to generate lexica, or in general?
Yes, in general. I mean, if we have, because of course, if I understand the definitional material, you said the definitional material, definitions from the Liddell Scott Jones, which means using definitions in that dictionary for ancient Greek, and this is expressed in English.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So this is the question. Okay.
Yeah. The problem is that at least the XML files of the Liddell Scott Jones are there.
Yes.
So actually we used the Liddell Scott Jones not just because it's a reference dictionary, but because the XML files, not perfect XML files.
I know.
Are there. At some point over when I had the project, I asked Brill to give me Montanari's dictionary. I don't know whether you already know, Monica, if I already mentioned this specific point in one of our conversations. And actually, they agreed to give me the morphological information in Montanari's dictionary, but not the definitions.
Yeah.
Because that is the core business, but still the morphological information was important for me because of the lexical part of WordNet. And the problem is that, okay, the Liddell Scott Jones is not perfect, but is there in a form.
Yes. I think that your answer is important. So I know many other issues, and I wanted to ask because your answer is important for many different reasons. So first, of course, you said the Liddell Scott Jones is there. One important thing also for the students listening to us, we have to consider the resources we have. We know that very well. And you said, Chiara, we have the Liddell Scott Jones, at least is in XML, we know a resource for classicists, but limited. But we will have to start with something. First problem. So we need more data, maybe other dictionaries in other languages, and maybe let's say dictionaries developed according to. We still use this term. The other problem that you mentioned is very interesting because it's a problem of also copyright. Is like with critical editions. We can use the reconstructed text, but not the critical apparatus because it's protected by copyright. For you, the problem is not the critical apparatus, but the definitions. I think they are considered a part protected, let's say. Exactly, the core business. So this is really a crucial problem. And this is extremely interesting, your answer. I think in general for our purposes in this context now with Sunoikisis, but in general for the community, for research, for both research and education. So also for our students, we have to be strategic. We use the data we have, which is a problem. And then when they criticize, well, but we can't use data protected by copyright. We need more digital data. We know the problem.
Yes. But another answer of mine is, okay, my language resource is not perfect. Okay, please build it yourself. No,
yes.
Yeah. Also, when we tried to digitize the back translation dictionaries, so English Ancient Greek and German Ancient Greek, it worked out. But with OCR methods, there are issues.
Yes.
Issues. So it worked out also because we didn't want to have like clean data, but just data that was okay for fine-tuning the model.
Yeah.
And so so there was like an applied purpose, and so the quality of data should not be as high as with like a purely theoretical interest in the language. So another issue we have to face is that we build resources, we use AI with a theoretical language-related question or questions, more questions in mind. So we use resources to do research. We don't use resources for applied purposes as we do for modern languages. So of course, whoever is gonna use our resource, that person is going to have a lot of issues with our resource because it's not perfect, because they are researchers and they want to have quality data, so to say. This is another issue. That we have to face in dealing with ancient languages because of the purpose of the resource we are building. But I mean, perfect things like do not exist in this world. So
we are not looking for perfection but still, of course, we were able to list the critical issues today, but fortunately we're working on that. So and maybe we will solve them, or at least
mitigate.
Yes, exactly. Mitigate, exactly, perfect. Mitigate them, exactly. And I think in the end is all these problems are a good lesson for learning. I guess we should look for a good, let's say, compromise. Of course, we want to produce good research, but we need always to deal with these compromises. Anyway, so I think it's a bit late, and Martina is looking at so, yes.
No, I could listen to this for hours.
No, I know, me too. But I know that we have, for our guests and for our audience, we have a time limit. Yeah.
And so I think we can say goodbye, but first of all, I'd like to say half a word regarding the exercise that you students will see that it's still given as TBA. So TBA, stay tuned. It will be announced soon. And of course, as I always say, each session, if you're a student of mine, you're obliged to do it. If you're not, please feel free to do that, because it's always nice to strive for perfection. And on this note, thank you very much. Thank you, Chiara and Edward. It was really brilliant, and I hope to see you next week. Bye, everyone.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Bye.